China's Communist Party leadership will soon release its five-year plan, which will run until 2030. The plan is an economic blueprint for China's long-term development. Analysts say it will likely set out ambitious targets for technological advances and high-end manufacturing.
China is transitioning into its 15th five-year plan from 2026 to 2030, which foresees a period of advances in robotics, modernization in microchips and AI, quantum technology and biomanufacturing, all while scaling back dependence on Western technology. While the idea of a five-year plan seems like a throwback to the Chinese Communist Party playbooks of the Cold War era, these economic blueprints remain a helpful guide to China's priorities. And the five-year plan also reveals some of the challenges China is facing. The government is likely to cut this year's economic growth target to a range of between 4.5% and 5%, according to reports. That follows 2 years of around 5% growth in gross domestic product. China's real estate slump is in its fifth year, with no end in sight. The property crisis means that Chinese consumers are unwilling to spend money, so the domestic economy is sluggish.
The problem is, ever since the property market collapsed in 2021, China lost a big chunk of their growth engine. Almost over 30% of the economy was dedicated towards property and infrastructure.
Punitive US tariffs have also weighed on the economy. So Beijing is hoping to export its way out of trouble. China reported its first ever $1 trillion trade surplus last year, as it offset the effects of the trade war by selling more goods to Southeast Asia, Africa and Europe.
I think the core point to take away for outsiders is really this continued focus on boosting China's manufacturing sector and industry, which means ultimately that more and more Chinese firms will continue to develop highly competitive products in a range of sectors.
For China, the challenge is to meet President Xi Jinping's goals in the five-year plan, while combating intense geopolitical competition and a faltering economy.
And my colleague Clifford Coonan from our business desk is here in the studio with me. You know, Clifford, when we talk about five-year plans, that seems like it comes from another century. I guess it does come from another century, but why do these five-year plans, why do they still matter in China today?
Well, it's part of this whole communist ethos, you know. I mean, it's easy to forget that China is still a communist country, but it is. I mean, it may have made all these advances and have these Chinese capitalism with Chinese characteristics, but this is very much part of the whole communist ethos. And it's like you said, the Soviets had them, the Chinese had them, and they've had them since 1953. They've had a couple of interruptions over that period, like when they had the Great Leap Forward and millions of people died and they had to stop it. But basically, it's part of the ethos, and they like the idea of planability. And because they don't have elections, they can basically think in these sort of five-year terms because they're anticipating they will still be in power.
So a planned economy, and an economy that is supposed to be heavily focused on robotics, AI, semiconductors. I mean, is that a realistic goal? Because couldn't China be hampered in this goal by not having access to the technology that is, inherently connected to this?
Yeah, I mean, robotics and all these new, biotech industries, all of these things. Robotics is a very good example, though. I mean, where they've sort of, they have been hampered by the fact that the US has put restrictions on certain ships. Donald Trump has rolled back a lot of those restrictions, and also
they're going to get access to NVIDIA.
That's right. Chips, yeah. And also China responded by developing their own tech. Mm-hmm. And despite, I mean, they're not quite catching up with the US on some of the high-tech chips, but they've been very fast. And Huawei, for example, is unrolling some of its new AI technology, and so in lots of areas it has actually managed to develop its own domestic version of it, and this is part of the confidence that they have when introducing this five-year plan.
There's all this video out there of these apartment blocks being blown up and that never had anyone living in them, which is part of the real estate bubble that burst in China. And we started hearing about that back in 2021, and yet we're still hearing about it, right? I mean, it hasn't been cleaned up, has it?
No, and people don't think it's going to resolve until maybe 2030. I mean, that's some of the forecasts. And that was nearly a third of the economy. And tech is maybe 12% of the economy. So tech cannot replace the property sector. So this is going to be a drag on the Chinese economy. When you think like with property, you've also got like the building industry, which is building the things. You've got the cement industry. You know, it spreads all the way into the economy. And also, people used to invest money. They would buy property. They have nothing to spend their money on now. So it's a drain on investment. So the property market crisis is a real drain on China.
What about manufacturing? I mean, that is where China remains strong. And I mean, when I look at here in Europe, I mean, we saw this week the Prime Minister of the UK meeting with Xi Jinping. I mean, how much of a rival / partner is China for the rest of the world when you're talking about manufacturing?
Well, they talk about a win-win situation, which means China wins twice.
Right.
And so Keir Starmer, Friedrich Merz will go next month, the German Chancellor. The Canadians have just been there. China agrees to these trade deals because basically it can sell cheaper goods overseas. They've lost a big chunk of the US market now, so they're looking for other areas to export. They've just had a trade surplus of $1 trillion, which means they've sold overseas more than they have imported to the tune of $1 trillion. So for them, it's exports. They're happy to make these deals. I mean, Keir Starmer came away from his trip to China with an agreement on visas, and that's about it.
And the 5-year plan, is it, obviously this is a planned economy, but isn't this an attempt also to manage slow decline? I mean, if you look at demographics, for example, there are some things about society and your economy that you just simply cannot dictate and make work the way you'd like them to work. I mean, is this 5-year plan, is it maybe a camouflage, if you will, for the fact that Xi Jinping is not God?
Yeah, I think so. Definitely. I mean, what you've seen, I mean, that's very well put, in the way that they've grown by 5% for the last 2 years. Now they're saying the next year they're expecting between 4.5% and 5%, which is a significant band. Demographics are working against China. They're worried about ending up a bit like Japan, where the demographics have really worked against the economy there, where Japan managed to get rich before it got old, and China hasn't gotten rich before it'll get old. This is its big fear. So as you say, it's trying to manage this process of decline and slow things down and hope that by introducing tech and robotics that they can revitalize the economy.
Yeah, it's harder to get rich once you're old. That's a very good point for countries and for people, I think. Clifford, good to have you in the studio. Thank you.